Revelation chapter 14. Chapter 14, as we kind of get into this chapter, I'm going to try to share a visible kind of a timeline, a visible kind of a time frame to kind of help us have an overview of that. Again, when you're going through the book of Revelation, it's very, very difficult to kind of ascertain when is all this going down, how is all this breakdown, and you'll listen to this guy, or you read after this guy, and everybody's kind of got a different opinion of how all this lays down, and you'll probably hear terms like parentheticals. That's how I was taught most of my life, parentheticals, that the Bible is teaching us a timeline, then there's a pause, there's a parentheses, and there's more going into that, so to speak. And so when we get to Revelation chapter 14, if you remember, John's already eaten that little book, and that little book went into his mouth. It was sweet as honey, then it became bitter. And my theory is that little book is the second half of the book of Revelation, and he's retelling. Remember, the angel told him he had to go back and he had to prophesy again. That's what the Bible tells. He had to go prophesy again. And my theory is, okay, it's giving us kind of a timeline, it's giving us kind of a time frame, and then John kind of retells it. And there's several reasons for that we kind of looked at in chapter 12. We start off in chapter 12, and then all of a sudden we go back to, seemingly, the birth of Christ. We have the woman there. We have Christ coming there. And so we just kind of take a detour, so to speak. Some people would say that's a parenthetical, that there's more going on. I'm thinking that's that little book now. That little book, he's going back and talking more. Kind of like the Gospels. I gave us that illustration. Why do we have 4 Gospels? Why do we need 4 Gospels? They're all telling us the same thing, but they're telling us from 4 different views, and some things overlap and some things are new within there. And so we get to chapter 13, and we're already over halfway through the book, and then now, all of a sudden, we're just now getting to the mark of the beast. I didn't spend a lot of time on the mark of the beast last week, simply because we'd gone so long into chapter 13. But if we'll look at the first half going through chapter 11, and remember in chapter 11, the real clue for me, or the real key for me that it's coming to an end in chapter 11, is the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord. And so you have that statement there in chapter 11, and then chapter 12 takes us all the way back to the birth of Christ, which kind of fits in there. And so we end chapter 13 with the mark of the beast. What is the mark of the beast? You know, there's 1,000 different scenarios on this, and I've shared a little bit what my thought is. Nobody is going to accidentally take it. You're not going to make a mistake and take the mark of the beast. If you take the mark of the beast, according to what we're going to read in a little while, you're going to be doomed forever. If you take this mark, there's no accidentally taking the mark. You're going to have to bow before the beast to take this mark, okay? And so whether it's a tattoo, whether it's something that's under the skin, something that's a chip, the imagination has no end when it comes to that. Whatever it's going to be, it's not going to be secret. Note that we just learned as well that the false prophet is the one who's going to make the whole world take this mark. To take that mark, you're going to have to bow before the idol that he makes, the creature that he makes and turns alive. So jumping into chapter 14 now, we're reintroduced to a group of people. We've already read about them once, but we're reintroduced to the 144,000. We read about them in chapter 7, and now we're reintroduced to them again, okay? And so he gets to verse 1 of chapter 14, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. So again, we've come back around full circle into these 144,000. And I think what makes it complex is What is that? Where in the time frame are we at? We've already discussed them. Is this just another recurrence of them? Do they have a second job or a second purpose in the book of Revelation? Or is the theory correct and we are just retelling and we're going back over everything, and 144,000 are just fitting in that sequence? And so where are these 144,000? This is why there's very different views. And when we was back in chapter 7, my opinion is the 144,000 are already dead. They're not going to be living people. They're Israel from the Old Testament. And there's several reasons for that. There is no Israel today by the 12 tribes. No 12 tribes exist today. They're not around today. And so even when you get into the New Testament, there is the book of James. And the book of James is written to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. But that's in 1st century A.D. And so there's no DNA test, there's no blood test that you can find to figure out which tribe you're in. And so most tribes, like most of the 12 tribes, have been completely gone. In fact, when you get to the New Testament, it's just Jews, because they're of the southern kingdom of Judah, which is Judah, Benjamin, and the Levites. That's the three main tribes of Judah. All those other tribes are now gone and become the Samaritans. Yeah, so when we look at this, who are these people? Who is Israel? And I believe believers are Israel today. I believe that's what the New Testament teaches. And so he looks, and a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And notice verse 2. I heard a voice. Where's the voice from? Heaven. Now, I want you to try to figure out, where are these 144,000? Where do you think they're at? Well, these 144,000 are in heaven, okay? Because this is where the voice is coming from heaven, and it's the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder, and I heard a voice of harpers harping with their hearts. So it tells us it's from heaven. But there's another clue as well. Where is Mount Zion? It's where everybody thinks it is, but not according to Hebrews chapter 12. Let me see. All right, so there's our picture of the 144,000. There's my breakdown, or there's a breakdown of the overlapping there. If the theory of the retelling there's, we'll get back to that again, but Revelation chapter 1 puts us back in 1st century A.D. Well, so does chapter 12. Chapter 12 puts us back in 1st century A.D. Then we have the churches in chapters 2 and 3. And then we have 4. We have him carried up in the Spirit up to the throne room of God. We have 5, talking about those the theme around the throne there. And in chapter 6, we begin to see the seals. The seals begin to take place in chapter 6. And the 6th seal is when the sun and moon go dark. That correlates to the day of the Lord and the rapture. But we get to chapter 7, and we see the 144,000. It says, hang on. Remember, wait. Don't pour out the wrath just yet. Till what? Till the 144,000 are sealed. Then right after the 144,000 are sealed, we see a great multitude immediately appear up into heaven. All right? So when we get over to chapter 12, we go all the way back to the birth of Jesus Christ. It goes through that. And chapter 13 begins to lay out the Antichrist and the false prophet and the mark of the beast. And then we get to chapter 14, and boom, we're right back to the 144,000 again. And as we'll look down at the end of chapter 14, if chapter 7 tells us that the 144,000 are going to be sealed just before the rapture, then if 14 is a retelling of it, then what should we expect next? The rapture. And so what we'll see at the end of chapter 14 is this picture of this reaping. Now, I will spend more time in that next week because we don't have enough time, but you'll kind of see how they'll parallel one another, and the rapture being seen in chapters 14 and 15, if they parallel and if they are retelling. And then we get to chapter 8, and that's the trumpets in chapter 8. Remember, the trumpets in chapter 8 begin to hurt the earth. Now, we get into chapter 16 and we start getting into the vials, and the vials begin to be poured out upon the earth. And we'll see how they correlate together as the wrath of God. 8, 9, 10, 11 are all about those trumpet judgments, trumpets, and the wrath of God. 16 on as well. And then 17, 18 have to do with Babylon, and then the Armageddon at the end of 19, the great white throne, as well as the millennial kingdom in chapter 20, and then the eternal ages, 21 and 22. But you kind of see how it's a retelling. I think 12 through 16 there is that little book where he's retelling. That's how, and I've listened to several people try to break down the book of Revelation, and everybody has a little different view. But that right now makes the most sense for me. And so I'll jump back to Revelation chapter 14. And again, getting back to the 144,000. We'll come back to that chart, and it'll make a little more sense as we continue on. So the 144,000, they're in heaven, okay? They're the voice from heaven, they're up in heaven, and I'll show you Hebrews 12 here in just a second. But it says, and they sung as it were a new song before the throne and before the four beasts. And we know the four beasts are in heaven, right? We've already talked about the four beasts, the 24 elders. They are around the throne in heaven. So who's singing this song? The 144,000 are singing the song, and they're singing before the four beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000. However, it does tell us that these are human beings. These are not angels, and these are not just creatures. They were redeemed from the earth. So they are literal people. They are literal human beings, okay? And I know it's kind of difficult. Again, I keep saying probably the hardest thing to understand about the book of Revelation is when it's being symbolic and when it's being literal and when they overlap. And so a lot of 13 and a lot of 14 are very symbolic, but yet there are literal things pointed out. So verse 4 says, these are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. And so they are men. They are males. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile. And again, that just reflects that there's no deceit, there's no lying in their tongue. For they are without fault before the throne of God. So we've had multiple keys that these people, these men, are in heaven. They're in the throne of God right there, verse 5. They're before the four beasts and the elders, and they're in Mount Zion. So these 144,000 in chapter 14, they're in heaven. That's where they are at, okay? So Hebrews 12:22 tells us that Mount Zion is the heavenly Jerusalem, okay? He says, but ye are come unto Mount Zion, unto the city of the living God. Notice the heavenly Jerusalem. So God tells us here that Mount Zion is where? It's in heaven, okay? Where did it tell us 4 or 5 times there in the first 5 verses of Revelation 14, that the 144,000 are already in heaven, okay? But they are humans. They are human beings. How do you get to heaven before the rapture? You have to die, okay? How do you stand before the throne of God without guile? And what else did he say in verse 5? How do you stand without guile and you are without fault before the throne of God? And you are a human. You got to be saved, but you're saved and you got faults. I'm saved and I got faults. You got to be separated from this flesh. What happens there? That's death. And so the 144,000 have already died. So everybody wants to make the 144,000 the Israel that is today, that God's going to save 144,000 of those people who live in Israel. That's not what the Bible is teaching. The Bible is teaching these people are already in heaven. They're already been redeemed for the earth. And so, find me 144,000 men who are virgins in the state of Louisiana that aren't children, right? So you have all this. They say, well, this is all symbolic, but the thing is, where are you going to find men without guile, who are without fault before God? They have to already be there. You're not going to find that on earth. Nobody on this earth is going to represent that. So we go back to chapter 7. And again, chapter 7, another clue of the rapture is Matthew 24 talks about the four corners, the four angels, right? Chapter 7, verse 1 says, after these things I see the four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth. Notice that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, okay? He has the seal of the living God. And he cries with a loud voice to the four angels. Now, what are the four angels there to do? They're there to get the saved, but they're about to unleash the wrath of God as well, okay? So notice there, he said, don't, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea. So the four angels here are going to hurt the earth, but they're told to wait till what? Till the 144,000 are sealed. And so the thought is, well, why are they going to be sealed? Because the 144,000 are going to come to the earth when all this is happening, and the seal is what's going to protect them while the wrath of God is being poured out. Verse 3 says, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. So what we see is what the four angels have come to do. They must wait until the 144,000 are sealed in their foreheads. And so we come back to chapter 14, and what does it tell us about them? It says in verse 1, and with him 144,000 having his Father's name written in their foreheads. So we see a matching up taking place. The servants of God, our God, in their foreheads, they're sealed with the name of God written, or the Father's name written in their foreheads in chapter 14. So we jump down to verse 4 of Revelation 7. It says, and I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. Then it goes down and it breaks down all those tribes. And again, this is what has confused theologians forever. The tribes don't match up. Dan's missing. There is no tribe of Dan, right? And then you got Joseph thrown back in there, right? And so it's kind of a mixture. And men have tried to figure out, well, where's all the 12 tribes that it's supposed to be? It's not laid out like it was in the Old Testament. There's all kind of theories that we could dive into about all that. But again, if they're Old Testament saints, they're already redeemed. One theory is that they're all children. One theory is that it could possibly be the young babies that Israel tossed into the fires of Moloch when they were in paganism, that it was all those kids that were tossed in there because they had no guile and they hadn't come into maturity yet. And there's all kind of theories that are trying to figure out, well, who are these 144,000 and what are they going to do? And so, again, the point being in verse 9, once you see in chapter 7 that the 144,000 are sealed for a purpose, to be on earth when the wrath of God is being poured out, and the believers are going to be taken out before the wrath of God is being poured out. And so that gets us to verse 9. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude which no man can number. I believe that's the rapture. I believe that's the rapture taking place in chapter 7. Boom, there's just automatically this multitude of people They show up. They're of all nations, kindreds, people, tongues. They stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robe, palms in their hands, and cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God which sitteth upon the throne and unto the Lamb. Okay? So we've gone through that, and I just want to again note that in chapter 7 again, you have the sealing of the 144,000, and then right after that, you have this great multitude appearing in heaven. Well, in chapter 14, you have the 144,000 sealed at the throne of God in heaven, and then right after that, you're going to see a great reaping. Now, the reaping has always kind of confused me because it's a twofold event. You have the righteous being redeemed and the unrighteous being punished, seemingly at the same time. But once you see it in chapter 7, if you remember when I just read chapter 7, what were the four angels there to do? They were there to hurt the earth, right? And the angel shows up and says, no, don't hurt the earth yet until I get the 144,000 sealed. And then what do we see happen next? The multitude taken up, and then you see God begin to hurt the earth, okay? And so as we continue, we're seeing the same thing seemingly happen again in chapter 14, which corroborates the theory that it's a retelling of it again. And so this is, I'm just going to look at the first reaping here real quickly. And so Revelation 14, we'll spend more time next week on it. But verse 14 says, And I looked, and behold, a white cloud. What is the white cloud? We've been over this multiple times. The white cloud's always synonymous with Jesus' coming, right? And so if that's correct, then we have a retelling, and not so much as another rapture, but the same rapture retold. And so he looks, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle, and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. Okay, and so others will tell you, well, that's the second coming of Christ, and there's a lot of people that are pointed at. I think it's just the retelling. It's the same thing happening again. That's just simply being retold. And so that's why you come back to the thought again that the first 11 chapters, the first half of the book of Revelation gives us the basic timeline, and then all of a sudden we get back to chapter 12, we go back to the birth of Christ, or go back to 1st century A.D., and start the retelling over again. So we go back through the tribulation, the rapture, and the wrath of God. That is the three main events of Daniel's 70th week that we see being retold, okay? All right. So no. No. They in their foreheads. They have in their foreheads. I mean, if they've been glorified already, I don't know. Yeah. Mm-mm. Uh-uh. No, they're standing around the throne. They're glorifying around the throne. But it would, no, no. I mean, they're able to sing. They're able to do all those things. And so it's just like when you go back into Revelation chapter 5 and you see the souls of men, they're all doing the same things with the bodies that other people, they haven't received that yet. And then when you get to chapter 7, you're seeing all those people in chapter 7, these multitudes seemingly having their bodies at that time. And so once they come back, that's why you're going to see, in my opinion, why the 144,000, you'll see them, but they'll be given somehow special bodies when they come back. That's why they'll come back after the rapture takes place. So rapture takes place, all believers, they'll come out, and when the rapture takes place, we'll immediately receive a new body. We'll read it immediately. And when they come back, they'll receive a special body that has the mark of God within them, and they'll take over, and this kind of gets ahead of me, but what are they here to do? That's what the dilemma is. What are the 144,000's purpose on earth if they are here? And there's two main lines of thought. One is that they're going to be the Lord's army. They're going to come and they're going to battle. And one reason that people lean to that is Dan's not there. And Dan was the cowardly tribe that refused to go take the promised land. If you study that out in the Old Testament, so that's a main reason. I go back, I still kind of go back to the general view that they're going to preach the gospel. And there's a couple reasons why I can't prove that. It never tells us exactly what they're going to do. It's just simply if there's no believers left on earth, then what's the purpose? It's either destroy, which makes sense for them to be an army, or God's going to leave 144,000 preachers on the earth. While he's pouring the wrath out on them, they have the truth of God being preached, and he's pouring the wrath out on them. It's going to be tough to be saved if you're left, I think. So back to Revelation chapter 4. Immediately after the 144,000, we see three messenger angels, okay? The first one has the everlasting gospel. Now notice, I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, okay? So some people will take that and say, okay, well, the gospel is now the angel's purpose. He's going to do that, and he's going to fly all over preaching the gospel, and that's what the scripture tells us. He's going to go to them that dwell on the earth, to every nation, and to kindred, and to tongue, and to people, okay? But if we read it again, the angel who's flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, and to kindred, and tongue, and to people. It could be read that he has what needs to be preached to the world, and that is the everlasting gospel. It doesn't have to be read that, okay, he's the one that's going to do it. He just has it. He has the everlasting gospel, and we have it today. We're not waiting on the angel to go preach it. We go preach it. We're called to preach the gospel to every creature, and likewise, if all the preachers and all the believers are gone, the 144,000 are sent with the seal of God so that they can endure the wrath of God while preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's just one theory of it. Literally, it doesn't tell us that. It comes right after it and never gives us a purpose of the 144,000 while they're here. And so that's the two main theories of who they are. I just lean to that they're going to preach the gospel. Verse 7, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him. And again, so you see right there that the angel is preaching a message there. For the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. And so the first thing we see with the 144,000 being sealed and before the wrath is poured out is this angel with this message that you better understand and fear God. It's about to get, you think it's gotten bad, but it's about to get really bad. And so we see in verse 7, the hour of his judgment is come, and so his wrath is about to be poured out. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 4, I want to use this scripture to make people realize that the gospel that the angel has is the same gospel that we have. It's the same gospel throughout the whole Bible. There's not different gospels. There's not multiple gospels. It's one gospel. Jesus died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he rose again the third day according to scriptures. That is the gospel. But people will say, well, this is a different gospel here. It's called the everlasting gospel. the gospel is everlasting because Jesus is the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And so Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4, says, For if he that cometh preacheth another Jesus, whom we have not preached, or if you receive another spirit which ye have not received, or another gospel which ye have not accepted, you might well bear with him. He's calling out the Corinthians that they would listen to a false teacher and a false gospel. Galatians chapter 1 and verse 6 says, I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel. Notice, which is not another. Remember, the Galatians were getting hammered because they had walked away from faith and grace and began to embrace works for salvation, that they needed to keep the commandments to be saved. Not keeping the commandments today for us as saved people glorifies Christ. It doesn't keep salvation. Verse 7 says, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. And then notice verse 8. This angel must preach the true gospel. He can't preach another. And Paul says, but though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. As we said before, and so say I now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than that which ye have received, let him be accursed. Any gospel that requires a works-based salvation is a false gospel and needs to be accursed. And therefore, if people, it's just, you can't even watch a Hollywood movie. I flipped on something last night. Like the first, what was that? That R.I.P.D., you ever seen that? That R.I. Rest in Peace Department? Yeah. It starts off, they get to heaven, and what are they doing? He got there because his good deeds outweighed his bad deeds. Hell's going to be full of people who are good, but they rejected Jesus Christ. The Bible says there's one thing you must do to be saved. That's believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. That is the gospel. If you don't believe that gospel, then you're going to be accursed as well. Everybody needs Jesus. So back to book of Revelation. To me, the most difficult part of the book of Revelation, chapter 14, is this verse. Like I said, chapter 13, all of a sudden we're introduced to the mark of the beast. We're introduced to the Antichrist, or the first beast, and the second beast, which we find out later is called the false prophet. Now we're introduced to Babylon, and Babylon has a major theme in the book of Revelation, but we're just now finding her, and now she's fallen. Well, we got an issue because we get over chapter 18, and she must be fallen again because we don't find her fallen until chapters 18 and 19, and so just about every theologian out there that I've looked at will say this is a prophetic message from the angel that Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she had made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. To me, that kind of feels like a cop-out explanation. It just doesn't fit. But we have to acknowledge there's when you get to chapter 16, you have another verse. All of a sudden, you just have Jesus just popping in there and making a quote there in chapter 16. Have the same thing in chapter 22. It's like, just all of a sudden there's just something that thrown in there. Just, man, what is that there for? Babylon is fallen, Babylon is fallen. I wish I would have thrown another Jim Crane quote in there. And one of his sayings about Babylon, and again, I don't agree with everything he does. He's written several books on Revelation, by the way, so he's much smarter than I am. But when it comes to Babylon, one thing to understand is Babylon is not only a religion, but it's also a government. And you kind of see that when you tie Daniel and the book of Revelation together, that it's a city, but it's also a religion. It's also a government. And what do you always see throughout history? You'll always see a government utilizing religion to get on its feet. And once the government is on its feet, it devours the religion, okay? What did we see with Rome? We saw that as well. Rome used the religion of Christianity to get on its feet, and then it took it over and started a false religion in what we now know as Catholicism, right? So what do we see in America today? America started off with Christianity, took it on, and what do we see happening today? Our government eating the religion, eating the Christianity, taking it over. Babylon will start off as this religious entity in this religious city to make it all about the Antichrist or the temple worship, and then once he takes it over, that part of it's going to fall because he's going to declare himself, and he's going to be over everything. And that's just one thought that comes from Brother Crane, that's what it means. It's not necessarily prophetic, but I know that's somewhat deep. But then you got the third angel that's going to show up. He's got another message. So basically we get to chapter 14, and we get three angels show up with three messages. The everlasting gospel, Babylon is fallen, and now in verse 9, the warning. The warning that don't you dare take the mark, okay? Third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead. Let me just pause just a second there. Another reason that you have this picture of he's talking about religious Babylon falling, is now it's not about the religion, that's what they made the temple worship out. It's all about making it out to be this religion, this great religious experience. That's how he brings everybody together, right? He's bringing everybody in unity over religion, but then he makes it about himself, and that's when Babylon's going to fall. And then when we get to the end, we see Babylon is destroyed by him. He destroys all of Babylon. So, and the third angel again saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, notice the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of who? Now, I've heard all my life that the worst thing about hell is going to be you're away from God. The worst thing about hell is you'll be removed from the presence of the Lord, but not here. You take the mark, and you're going to be cast into this lake of fire in the presence of the Lamb. He's going to be there. I mean, even David says, even if I was to go to hell, I can't escape from God. God is everywhere. So what does that mean there? And so you have to be aware of false teachers and people who believe that hell is something that's not eternal and is not full of fire and brimstone and eternal judgment and eternal pain and eternal suffering. And so a lot of people try to, well, hang on. If we share that with people, people are going to hate God. People are going to think God's this big, ugly, mean guy, and so we can't just share all that. And I see all these people say all the time, God never sends anybody to hell, you send yourself. That is a lie. Friend, I want you to know God's the one that's going to send you there. He's the one that's your judge. You're going to stand before him at the judgment. Who you think's going to cast you in there? I'm going to tell you, you ain't going by your own accord. You ain't freely going to jump in there. Somebody's going to give you the boot. Who's that going to be? That's going to be God. And he said, preacher, they ain't going to hear that. They ain't going to listen. And that's the message that our forefathers preached. That's the message that got to the heart. That's the message where Jude said, pull them out the fire. Friend, they're going to hell, and they're going to go in the presence of the Lamb. That's like people don't want to hear that. And what's the movie, the Christian movie star that just come out and said hell's not eternal? You know why he said that? What was his name? Kirk Cameron. And I love Kirk Cameron. Or used to. Kirk Cameron come out and said hell's not eternal. You know why? I just saw that interview this afternoon. I looked it up because I want to know why he said it. You know why he said it? He said because countless atheists I try to witness to will not believe on Christ if they believe hell's eternal. And they ain't going to believe on Christ anyway. They need to believe on Jesus because I'm going to tell you what. Why did you get saved? Because you scared of going to hell, I can tell you, wasn't you? Am I the only one? Raise your hand if you got saved because you didn't want to go to hell. Amen. And the hell ought to be scary. We try to remove the scary out of people, and people ain't afraid no more. Rand, I'm going to tell you, verse 10 is a scary scripture. Without mixture into the cup of his indignation, he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of Jesus Christ. They will be tormented. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up how long? Forever and ever. And they have no rest, day or night. That's scary. Who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. That's why I say if you receive the mark, you're damned forever. That's why I don't believe any believer in this time will ever receive this mark. God somehow, some way, is going to protect them from this mark. Or else he's got to reword verses 9, 10, and 11. Because that's absolute. If you take the mark, you are going to this lake of fire forever and ever. Okay? Let me just jump over to Revelation chapter 20. Now notice this. This is after the millennial reign. Okay? So the false prophet and the beast are cast into this lake of fire, and this is 1,000 years later, okay? The devil that deceived them was cast into this lake of fire, again, where the beast and the false prophet are. They're all cast there, and shall be tormented how long? Day and night, forever and ever, okay? So notice that they're already there, the false prophet and the beast are already there when the devil, and they shall be tormented. They're already being tormented day and night, forever and ever. So we jump back again to Revelation chapter 13, and again, that's that mark of the beast. He calls us, the false prophet causeth all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Again, here is wisdom. Let him that understandeth count the number of the beast, for it is the number of man, 600, 666, or 666. We come back to that thought again. Do we see a retelling, perhaps in theory, of what's going on at verses 14 and 15? And so I want to kind of tie up before we're going to wrap this up and kind of jump into next week and kind of prepare ourselves to next week. All right, so again, 14 has always been a fairly confusing chapter for me with Babylon is falling. But if the theory he's talking about religious Babylon, it being fallen and the Antichrist taking over there, the 144,000 jumping in at the same time frame of chapter 7, and then the rapture happening right after in chapter 7. We have the 144,000 again in chapter 14, and then seemingly another reaping here, okay? So if we go back and look at this parable, and try to match it up with the reaping, so to speak. He says, another parable in Matthew 13, another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? So we have this picture that he's going to plant this field of wheat, so to speak. He's going to plant it. It's been ready. They've sown the seed. And then all of a sudden they get it, and now there's weeds all in it. And so by the time they can tell, because supposedly the wheat and tares look identical, and even most historians say once the wheat and tares come up, the only way you can tell the difference is when they head out. And the wheat heads out into a wheat head, and tare heads out into a tare head. And so they look identical as they grow together. But now they notice that there's tares in there, and so they're growing up together, and they've rooted down together. And so you can't just go in and pull them up by the roots. That's the only way you can kill the tare. You can't. It's like grass. You can just cut it, but it just keeps coming back till you kill the root. And so in verse 28 he says, "An enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while you gather up the tares, you root up also the wheat with them." And so they can't go uproot the tares yet, because if they uproot the tares, they uproot everything. So we have this picture that once everything is uprooted, you got to uproot it together. You follow with me? That's the parable here. Now he says, "Let both grow together until the harvest." Okay, so what do you do to a harvest? You reap it. That's when it's full, you reap. So you sow and you reap, right? So we have a reaping. We have the earth in chapter 14. It's full, it's ready. So it seems to coincide there. But he says, first, gather together first the tares. Well, that's not what happens first in 14. He gathers the wheat first, so we got a problem. Until you back up till chapter 13 and realize what happens in chapter 13. The mark of the beast. The mark of the beast identifies who? All the tares. All the tares get rounded up by the mark of the beast, and they're going to be gathered together, and they're going to be burned, and they're going to go into this wine press at the end, the second reaping, so to speak, of chapter 14, okay? And so again, that's just trying to put things together to make sense of them. But we have, again, the gathering there of one gathering, but it's twofold. There's a gathering of wheat, and there's a gathering of tares. And what do we have in chapter 14? We have a reaping of believers, and then we have a reaping of the wicked who are cast into the wine press. And the wine press is chapters 15, 16, and 17 there. All right? So that kind of gets us into next week's thought of the reaping that's taking place there of Revelation chapter 14. All right, go again. When we look at the 144,000, the 144,000, I believe, are 12,000 men who were either somehow celibate for the Lord, celibate for their lives devoted to Christ, or again, the other theory is that they were babies that were cast to the fire of Moloch, or they were killed, or they were whatever. You got to figure out how these men are Jewish men who are virgins. They've never been with women, so they've never had family. They've never passed on their seed. So again, your imagination just trying to figure out how does that make sense. And so they represent the Israel of the Old Testament. And again, it's not a far-fetched idea when you see the two witnesses are who? Nobody argues really that the two witnesses are Moses and Elijah, two Old Testament saints. Well, it's not that far-fetched to see that the 144,000 as well be Old Testament saints, especially when they're already in heaven. And if chapter 7 and chapter 14 is the correct view that they overlap, the rapture hasn't happened yet. And the only way to get to heaven before the rapture is die. And so somehow they've died, they've gone on to heaven, but God has chosen them to come back for a purpose. And again, whether if you want to believe they're the Lord's army or the Lord's preachers, one way or the other, they're coming back for the Lord's purpose. And the wrath of God, they will be immune to.